The Pillarmen were peak JoJo villains. They were incredibly powerful, dangerous, and intimidating, and it seemed unrealistic for Joseph to be able to beat them. Kars, Wamuu, and ECDC were all very powerful, but it seems Kars was the most powerful and ECDC was the weakest. Or maybe Wamuu was the slightly stronger of the two between him and Kars, but then when Kars became the ultimate Kars, when he got the red stone, then he surpassed Wamuu. So Kars most of the time would just focus on the red stone. Wamuu was very focused on fighting much more than the other two, and ECDC was focused the most on just doing what Kars wanted. As soon as they meet each other, it feels like they're way out of Joseph and Caesar's league and they have no chance. Wamuu quickly puts an end to Caesar's attack, warning him to stop. And then with Joseph trying his tricks and getting involved, Wamuu decides to fight him. Joseph manages to be the first opponent that's ever hit Wamuu in his face. So when he's about to get his life taken by Wamuu, he knows Wamuu is prideful and loves to fight worthy opponents. But Joseph says if he had one more month of hormone training, he'd be able to beat him, which makes Wamuu tempted because he's prideful and likes to fight worthy opponents. So he decides to allow him to fight him after a month, but Wamuu placed a ring on Joseph's artery and the antidote was in his lip ring. ECDC decided to do the same in case they fought and placed his ring in Joseph's throat, and he had the antidote in his nose ring. I love how all the three Pillarmen had distinct personalities and looks. Kars was the most evil and focused on his goal of achieving the red stone. He was the leader of the Pillarmen, and he had very long purple hair, while Wamuu would take orders from Kars but was very dedicated to his own warrior philosophy and fighting opponents that are worthy, just taking that seriously. He had light color hair and his hairstyle was flat on the top. He also controlled wind, while ECDC had a personality that was sort of between Wamuu and Kars. He definitely had a little bit of a warrior philosophy and tried to fight opponents once they are worthy, but he was much more focused on listening to Kars and not as strict about the warrior philosophy or obsessed with it as Wamuu. He has long gray hair coming out from the back of his head. It's coming out from under his headpiece, with all of the Pillarmen being extremely muscular, the amount of a top bodybuilder on steroids. They all didn't take Joseph and Caesar seriously. They had far more superior intellect. They had lived for 12,000 years. They were very hard to kill and nearly immortal at that point. There was even sometimes they would just burst out laughing at Joseph and Caesar when they first met because of how many times they've heard those lines that they were saying from hormone users before. These villains were never boring during this part. They were built up so well, they felt dangerous, scary, interesting, everything. However, before they're supposed to meet up and fight after the 1 month is done, Joseph ends up encountering ECDC, who had just took out his trainer. And of course, Joseph had improved a lot by this time because he's been training hormone for nearly a month. So him and ECDC end up fighting. This is a really good fight where there's so many plot twists. At one time it feels like, let's say ECDC is gonna win, and another it feels like Joseph is gonna win. And they both keep pulling things out left and right, with Joseph using a lot of tricks. It was a very close fight, but by the end of it, Joseph did come out on top. Now, ECDC was a good character and member of the Pillarmen. However, he just seemed to be the weakest because number one, he was the first one to go. That doesn't mean that he was the weakest, but It's almost as if the writer was trying to portray it that way. He just didn't seem as powerful as Carson Whammoo, and I expected him to be more powerful. But his fight against Joseph was a great one, and whether or not I expected him to be stronger, it was an awesome fight with ECDC using his abilities, losing an arm, and then coping at one point by crying because he's annoyed and that's his way of coping. There's so many funny lines by Joseph and just so many things happening that you wouldn't expect. But eventually, yes, Joseph does win and he gets the antidote from ECDC's nose ring, also taking down ECDC and getting rid of one of the Pillarmen for good. But whatever. The other two Pillarmen, Carson and Whammoo, I like them even more than ECDC and they seem even more interesting. So with him now gone, they're still incredibly dangerous and it still seems unrealistic for Joseph and Caesar to beat them. We next see Kars go to the location where the German army was. He was able to touch the wall and then know how many people were in the room. He identified 5 and their gender and height without even entering the room, taking their lives. However, he did all of this to get the red stone, which shows how he's willing to do anything to reach his goal. He's a very ambitious and determined character, and that personality trait shines through the entire time. However, we do see that Kars can make mistakes because once he enters the room of the building, there's actually a 6th person in there that he wasn't able to be aware of because he doesn't have the body heat like everyone else that Kars can track, because Rudolf von Stronheim is now a cyborg. So we are seeing that there are limits to their powers, and even if maybe Kars's ability to track the body heat from outside the building was working, when he can't do this, he can have a much harder time. When he finally gets his hands on the red stone during this encounter, after him, Rudolf von Stronheim, and Joseph fighting each other, you can tell finally he's happy and he believes he's finally achieved his goal. However, he once again loses the red stone and it gets taken by Joseph Joestar. But we saw how confident Kars was, how he believed it was a destiny for him to get the red stone, and he expected this day to come. He is a very confident, determined, ambitious, and self-believing personality. A very powerful mindset, and you could say that about all of the Pillarmen, which makes them even more dangerous than they already are. When Caesar fought Whammoo, it was a great fight. However, it was very sad that Caesar lost his life because he was so close to beating Whammoo and accidentally blocked the sun, which gave Whammoo a chance to use his special move, Holy Sandstorm, making Caesar so badly injured to the point where he bleeds out. This fight was great and made me like both Whammoo and Caesar much more. It had shown how much Caesar had grown, how he would have probably beat both the other Pillarmen. Even Whammoo said that if Kars had made it out alive, he would have been even far more injured than Whammoo. And Whammoo was lucky that he had the ability to use wind and Holy Sandstorm, that Kars would have stood even less of a chance against Caesar. And if Caesar had just not made that one mistake, he would have won. I was just impressed with how much he improved and how determined he was to beat Whammoo. But then, Whammoo showed his loyalty not only to Kars before, but now showing it to his warrior philosophy and paying respect to Caesar, believing him to be a true warrior, and allowing him to take the antidote from his lip ring before he died, because Caesar wanted it for Joseph. This not only makes Whammoo much more likable, but it shows he's a man of his word. And right before the fight, Whammoo was actually able to go outside during the day with the sun out, but only when he was in his wind form, where he was almost like a ghost or very hard to see, which I didn't expect, and I also found it cool that he could do that. I think that's a very helpful thing that he can do because the other two Pillarmen can never go outside during the day and they would lose their life if they did. However, that ability can come in handy And it makes me think even more that during this time before Kars became Ultimate Kars with the Red Stone, Wamuu was even more powerful than him. Also, because Wamuu said that Kars had less of a chance of beating Caesar than him, it makes me think that Wamuu might have been slightly more powerful or a little bit better of a fighter. By the time Wamuu and Joseph fight, they're both eager to win, and the fight is really long. Most of the time, especially during the first half, it appears Wamuu is dominating Joseph, proving why the Pillarman's reputation is what it is. But with the help of Caesar's bandana, Joseph manages to beat Wamuu and respects Wamuu as a true warrior, just like Wamuu respected Caesar. And Wamuu made sure that Joseph got the antidote from his lip ring. Wamuu was just left as a head, and he faded into the wind. All that was left was Kars. And this is where he showed his true colors. He clearly thought he was the best and that Wamuu was too soft. He went up against Lisa but cheated and made Joseph have to deal with him. I wonder what would have happened if Lisa and him had actually fought though, and he had not cheated. Joseph, for a second, it looks like beats Kars when he falls into a bunch of spikes below, but he awakens after a while. Now with the red stone, he becomes Ultimate Kars. Undoubtedly the strongest and most powerful he's ever been, and the most powerful Pillarman. The sun no longer hurts him, and he stands in the morning sunlight. He now grows wings, and immediately just wants to go after Joseph to start his new way of life in the world. Obviously chases Joseph in an airplane, and then Joseph crashes. Kars falls into a volcano, but manages to survive, coming back up, chopping Joseph's hand off, and then somehow Kars gets launched into outer space, very lucky for Joseph, and freezes forever in outer space. However, Ultimate Kars was clearly way too much for Joseph, and if that plot armor wasn't there, if he didn't get lucky, there would be no way he would have won. Joseph was not nearly strong enough to take on Kars in his ultimate form. They should have made sure he never reached his ultimate form, or he would have needed another really strong hormone user to help him. With Kars now in outer space, I hope he does eventually come back, or we do see more from him, because he was a great JoJo's villain, and I would like to see him come back just like how Dio Brando came back. Overall, the Pillarmen were amazing villains. They had unique personalities, they were powerful, intimidating, they had interesting abilities and character designs, and they were the most powerful JoJo's villains we had ever seen. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments. Are the Pillarmen your favorite JoJo's villains, or are they some of your favorite? And I'll see you in the next video.